This is Dr. Ben White with the Rational Wellness Podcast, bringing you the cutting-edge information on health and nutrition from the latest scientific research and by interviewing the top experts in the field. Please subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast on iTunes and YouTube, and sign up for my free ebook on my website by going to drwhites.com. Let's get started on your road to better health. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Thank you so much for joining me again today. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a ratings and review. I'd really appreciate that. That helps move us up in the rankings, and more people will find out about the Rational Wellness Podcast. You can go to my YouTube page, White's Chiro, and see the video version of this podcast. And if you go to my website, drwhites.com, you can find detailed show notes and a complete transcript. Our topic for today is type 1 diabetes, and we have Lyle Haugen with us today. I'm very excited. This is the first time we've talked about type 1 diabetes. We've talked several times about type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, but we've never had a detailed discussion about type 1. So we're going to discuss what type 1 diabetes is and how best to help patients manage it from a diet, exercise, and lifestyle perspective. For most of us in the functional medicine world, we are likely to see quite a higher percentage of patients with type 2 than type 1 diabetes, because only about 5% of diabetics have type 1. Type 1 diabetes used to be known as juvenile diabetes, but it's better described as insulin-dependent diabetes. In this condition, the pancreas produces little or no insulin. Insulin is the hormone that signals the muscle cells to pull sugar from the bloodstream to enter the cells to use for energy. It's generally understood to be an autoimmune condition, and while it usually appears during childhood or adolescence, it can develop in adults. The cause of type 1 diabetes is controversial, though it is generally thought to be autoimmune in origin. 90% of those with type 1 diabetes have at least one of the HLA-DQA1, HLA-DQB1, and the HLA-DRB1 genes. There's some relationship between type 1 diabetes risk and both gluten and dairy intake. For example, there's an increase in type 1 diabetes risk in countries that drink primarily A1 milk as compared to A2 milk. Viral infections appear to be triggers for the onset of type 1 diabetes in a percentage of patients. Exposure to toxins may be triggers for the onset of type 1 diabetes. And some integrative doctors feel that vaccines may be triggers, though the studies so far don't seem to show this. Children with type 1 diabetes tend to have less diversity of the bacteria in their gut, and they also tend to have leaky gut. Type 1 diabetes has quite a number of possible complications, especially if the blood sugar levels are not properly managed. Diabetic retinopathy is the most common cause of blindness. Diabetes can lead to nerve damage, referred to as neuropathy, sometimes leading to impaired sensations in the hands and feet. This is why diabetes is the leading cause of amputation of the feet. Diabetes increases the risk of high blood pressure and heart disease. It increases the risk of digestive problems and erectile dysfunction. Diabetes is also the leading cause of kidney failure. Helping to manage a patient with type 1 diabetes is quite a bit more difficult than managing a patient with type 2. Patients are all taking insulin, and hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, is as much of a concern as hyperglycemia, which can occur but is less common in type 2 diabetics until they start needing to take insulin. Then they become more like type 2 diabetics to manage, type 1 diabetics to manage, I mean. Lyle Haugen is a type 1 diabetic and registered nutrition health coach. He also suffered with some of the associated conditions of diabetes, including eye problems, Crohn's disease, and diabetic gastroparesis. He realized that in order to get his health back on track, he had to figure out a better way to manage his condition than it was being managed by his healthcare providers. He developed a system on how to manage insulin, diet, exercise, and lifestyle to get his type 1 diabetes under control. And he's been teaching others as a health coach. Lyle, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Reese. How are you?
I'm good. Lyle, can you tell us when you first discovered that you had type 1 diabetes?
Well, I was 22 years old. I was just back from dive school. I went back to work in the oil and gas industry. I spent most of my early childhood and young manhood in northern Canada. So I was about 15 miles from the Northwest Territories border. I opened a building one day. The building blew up. I was flown out of there 2-3 days later. The numbers on the house across the street started to get fuzzy. I was urinating frequently. My thighs were burning because the bathroom was upstairs in the little apartment that I had. So every time I had to urinate, I had to walk up a set of stairs. I was thirsty, and what do you do when you're thirsty? In those days, I don't know if you remember, this is 1984 or 5. We didn't have bottled water. And in northern Canada, the water was highly chlorinated, so, you drank everything but water. So what did I drink? Apple juice.
There you go.
Smart like tractor, right? I think my first initial reading but I knew what it was because when I was down going to dive school, I took a secondary course. It was quite intensive, and I became a diver medic. So when you're in a diving situation, I'm trained to 1,000 feet plus on mixed gases. And even though you're on a ship and you're really not that far away, technically you're a half an inch of vessel material away from being outside, you might as well be halfway to Mars because it's 28 days to get out of there.
Oh, wow.
28 days. Wow. And that's if you decompress smoothly.
Wow, that's crazy.
Oh, yeah. And it could be longer. It could be 33, 35, right?
Wow.
So they trained guys to basically be almost the hands of a doctor inside. So I was trained to suture, do, tracheostomies, McSwain darts, reinflate lungs, pretty cool stuff. Right? It's like pretty cool stuff. And then, it was the middle of winter when I got done. So I had a job lined up in the Beaufort. They were starting to do some drilling up there, and the new Canadian laws mandated that there was a diver medic on every shift. So there was basically, 3 people would run in the bell, right? There was always an extra person in the bell. So along comes another job. I have to get some money. This is where I, get blown up, make a long story short. So how did that relate to my diabetes? Well, let's do a little bit of lifestyle. You're living in camp. Remember I talked to you about the water. It's even worse when you're out in camp because you don't put milk in the coffee because it turns green. If you ever been in the back country,
I'm not sure what that means, but I'm not sure I want to know.
If you've ever been in the back country and you maybe haven't, where there's muskeg up in the country where I lived, right? Which is like
there's what?
Muskeg, it's called.
What is that?
Tundra, muskeg.
Okay.
So it's like bog or peat material.
Okay.
So all the water is kind of tea color to begin with.
Huh.
And that's what they used to, we didn't have very good, work standards back in those days.
Okay.
But, I was drinking a lot of milk, and I'm in my early 20s. I shouldn't be drinking milk at all, right? But I'm drinking a lot of milk. I'm eating a lot of breads. They've got, a lot of pastries out. You're taking sandwiches for lunch. You see where this is going, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned it in your preamble there. You talk about leaky gut. And that's my biggest thing. My biggest passion would be to get a hold of brand newly diagnosed diabetics, because I remember what it was like. I remember it was this honeymoon period once I kind of got the insulin in me a little bit and it stabilized a little bit. And that, I believe, is our window. If we can totally change the diet right at that point, I think we can rescue some of the pancreas. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. Some of the data definitely seems to show that at the beginning, type 1 diabetics still have some ability to secrete insulin. It's just not enough.
Right, right. So if we go with the same premise that we're an autoimmune,
right? And if you can interrupt that autoimmune attack on the pancreas.
Exactly. So, but on the other hand, if we don't, then you end up with that grocery list that, you told everybody about that I got.
Right. Yeah. For example, we know that celiac disease is associated with type 1 diabetes, but kids who have celiac disease who completely eliminate gluten don't get type 1 diabetes.
Right. And I have a client that had first diagnosed with lupus, then type 1.
Very common. You get one autoimmune disease, you get another.
But I think it's only become common because we're not stopping the leaky gut.
Right.
Like statistically from genetics, what I've read is if you've got one, it's almost astronomical statistically to get two from genetics.
I think you're right. Definitely. It's the leaky gut. And then it's, once the immune system starts getting in that attack mode against your own cells, yes. A lot of times there's cross reactivity. So your body reacts to the gluten, and then that gluten molecule looks similar maybe to some proteins in your pancreas. And so those same antigens start attacking your pancreas.
Or even maybe this vision. I kind of had this vision of, what's large is small, what's small is large. So if you are continually expressing proteins into your system, and your immune system is battling the battle of all times, Armageddon,
right?
There's going to be collateral damage.
Yes.
Right? There's got to be. You just can't be pummeling yourself that hard for that long.
Absolutely. You're not supposed to have those large molecular weight proteins floating around your bloodstream. They're going to create problems.
And that is, I think, part of the underlying problem with the management and the treatment for type 1. We've got, what is it now? I think I read 135 or 137 specialties now in the medical field. So, everybody out there, visualize yourself chopped up into 137 pieces, right?
Sure.
It makes it difficult for anybody to find the whole picture, the whole package with that.
Yeah, I'm the GI doctor. I only look at the gut. I'm the lung guy. I only look at the lung.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, my doctor, kind of a funny story on that. I asked him why didn't he specialize, and it turned out he had an eye condition from birth, and he had to wait till he got to adulthood before they could do anything with it. And he was actually in med school at the time, and he was thinking about being an ophthalmologist. And then he found out that there was 2 or 3 different types of ophthalmologists, one for the front, one for the back, one for the nerve, I believe. And he was aghast, right? He just couldn't believe that. So I don't know. It's a shame. But so anyways, getting back to what I think
your trauma actually played a role in the trigger for your diabetes?
Well,
I know it's hard to say.
Short answer, yeah. So would you like me to describe what happened?
Yeah.
All right. Let me see. It was about 42 below that morning. I got into a rubber-tired backhoe. I drove 52 kilometers to this location well site. It was what's called a dehydrator building. So there's some big pipe towers on one side. There's a fire on the other end in what's called a reboiler. There's circulating glycol that what it does is the glycol removes the moisture from the natural gas coming up out of the ground, and then it's dry going through the pipeline so it doesn't freeze off the pipeline. That's the equipment. I get there in a rubber-tired backhoe because, remember I was talking about muskeg and tundra? Yeah. The unit was sitting on piles, on steel pilings, but the pad had sunk and took the stairs with it. So you'd get to the top of the stairs, and then you still had to reach straight up to get into the building just to undo the latch.
Huh.
So if I first get there, and my job as an operator is, see what the unit is doing and make sure everything, record numbers, do all that kind of stuff. So I get there and I reach up, I try to get into the building. I take one glove off, reach the hardware, open the door, reach inside, grab the panic hardware on the inside of the door, the big bar across the door. Inside here onto the sill, pull myself up, and just as I pull myself up, I catch a glow. A little orange flash glow from the backside of the reboiler. And what had happened was the building was completely full of gas. The glycol had disappeared because of a problem with the system. The pump was running away. It cracked a line. That's what put gas into the system. The reboiler had lost all the glycol. We had a runaway. We had a Chernobyl coming on here, right?
Wow.
All I had to do was give it the old O2. And so you got to visualize this now. It's 42 below. I've been on this backhoe, which in 1985 was not heated and not like you see today, right? It wasn't a comfortable ride. So I had all kinds of equipment on. I was dressed to the, to take 40 below. There was just a little bit of my face in the back of this hand, or this hand was exposed. So that orange glow, I knew exactly what it was as soon as I caught it. And I just went, oh, basically I went, few expletives. And I started to turn around like this, but I had all these clothings on, and this clothes on, and I'm standing in front of it. It's a 3-foot door, but everything that, pretty much blocked this door. And I mean, what's the first thing you do before you put a cannonball in a cannon? You put some wadding in there, right? I was kind of like the wadding around, and I was just standing in the door jamb. Well, Dr. Wheats, when that thing lit up, I took off, and it punched the wind right out of me.
Wow.
I'm flying through the air. As I'm flying through the air, the flames are coming past me like this, because, I don't travel as fast as they do. And I mean, it was shooting straight out of this door. So it was like literally being shot out of a cannon. Wow. And because the floor was so high, it was probably, I would say 8-9 feet above the ground. Right. So you could do the math on that, but I landed halfway between the building and where the wellhead was drilled, which was 80 feet. So 40 some feet before I landed. Then I went in and I closed all the valves. You get into that adrenaline mode, panic mode, right? Because you just had this experience. And I even walked right in behind the D-high, like 4 feet from the wall that was in flames, and I closed the pipeline valve. I closed all the valves off so nothing ran away. Then I had to get back into the backhoe and drive back 52 kilometers.
Wow.
But that's a whole nother story. So
okay.
That's how I got blown up.
I've really been enjoying this discussion, but now I'd like to pause to tell you about the sponsor for this episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. This episode is sponsored by Pure Encapsulations, which is one of the few lines of professional nutritional supplements that I use in my office. Pure Encapsulations manufactures a complete line of hypoallergenic, research-based dietary supplements. Pure products are meticulously formulated using pure, scientifically tested and validated ingredients. They are free from magnesium stearate, gluten, GMOs, hydrogenated fats, artificial colors, sweeteners, and preservatives. Among other things, one of the great things about Pure Encapsulations is not just the quality products, but the fact that they often provide a range of different dosages and sizes, which makes it easy to find the right product for the right patient, especially since we do a lot of testing and we figure out exactly what the patients need. So, for example, with DHEA, they offer 5, 10, and 25 milligram dosages in both 60 and 180 capsules per bottle size, which is extremely convenient. And now, back to our discussion. Let's get right into it. What are the 4 variables that we need to manipulate to help manage patients with type 1 diabetes?
Great question. First thing, we got to stabilize the basal, the background insulin amount. If you analyze what a normal pancreas does, it constantly exudes a little bit of endocrine, right? It's always managing constantly. It's a very fluid thing. It's changing every second of every minute, right? So to manage all of the metabolism in the background, when I first started, we didn't have a good background insulin. We didn't have a good long-term sustaining flatlining insulin, I call it. We now have Lantus, and that does really well. But prior to that, we had too many curves that we had to follow. And literally, you got to be a math pro. If you don't understand geometry, if you don't understand mathematics, good luck on trying to meet the amount. How many years did it take to be able to have one missile coming from this country and another one from here and shoot it down? Because that's what you're doing when you're putting carbs into your system. And then taking some insulin. You're hoping the two curves are going to meet exactly at the same time, and they rarely ever do. And they never do in a person that's not diabetic that's eating high carb content, right?
Yep.
So what is good for people, that aren't diabetic is good for the diabetics and vice versa. So that's where I learned how to manage that insulin. So we stabilize that blood sugar level. So I'll give you an example. I used to be on about 24 units of background or basal insulin. Every meal you do the carb counting or calculating or choicing, whatever the system was of the day, right? Because they always come up with a new system that never worked. Sorry. I'm a little cynical here on this, but it never worked.
Right.
So, if you can visualize, you got sort of a flat line going along, and then you got these peaks of ingested carbohydrate that you're supposed to get this curve that doesn't look anything like the curve that the peaks of the absorption rates are here. And you're trying to get all that to coordinate it, and you're switching it every meal, every time. So let me just try to help people who don't know what we're talking about. So type 1 diabetics have to try to manage their blood sugar. And so part of that is you try to match insulin to the amount of carbohydrates that you're consuming. And so you're using a certain amount of long-acting insulin to try to have some ability to control your blood sugar, but not too severely. And then you're using a shorter-acting insulin that you're trying to time with the amount of the carbohydrates that you're consuming with that meal. Correct? You nailed it. Much better explanation than I did. Thank you.
Okay.
So when I took a total value of all the insulin I was consuming in a day, all right, you got 24 here, you got some for this meal, some for that meal, we're looking at like 50, 55 units a day. And the standard diet that was always taught to every diabetic, and here's the bad part, whether you're type 2 or type 1, back in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s, was about 50 to 60% carbohydrate.
Right.
That's what killed my mother, because that came out in the early 70s when she got diagnosed, right?
Right.
Horrible. So we didn't know that. We rely on the professionals, right? I didn't know.
Right.
So
and that was pretty much the story until pretty recently.
Until very recently,
Diabetes
right?
Association, right?
Exactly. And they're still a little reluctant to come out with it because they've been on the wrong track for so long. It's been horrible. When, if you go back and you study a little of the history, they were on track right about the time they were discovering insulin, because they knew back then a ketogenic diet, you could stay alive a little bit longer, right?
Correct.
Not a whole bunch longer, but you could definitely get a little bit better. And there was a few guys back in the 20s that worked in conjunction with insulin and still that same diet because they weren't sure how the insulin worked yet, right? But roll ahead to today, now we're a lot smarter. The interesting thing is I was in the area I was at, we had no internet. I didn't have access to any of this stuff 7 years ago. So ironically, I stumbled on this on my own. I just went out to work one day. I had to do a job. I was going to be gone for 7 or 8 days, running this unit 24 hours a day. That's kind of the business and the job that I had. I needed to pack all my food. So I just took that particular trip, everything that was energy dense. I took some pulled pork, I had some smoked salmon. I took, a couple of things here, and I left out all the bread, all the stuff that I would require short-acting insulin for. And I just sat there out in the middle of nowhere. Kids don't do this at home. Because I had nobody around me to help me. And then I just slowly started to jack up my background insulin. So if you took an accumulation of my insulin at that 50 mark, I figured, well, at some point, if I take out that high peak with the carb, I can take some of that carb, jack up the oils over here, use a moderate amount of protein, because I already know if you take too much protein, you'll need insulin for it, right? Because it breaks into carb too, right?
Absolutely. Gluconeogenesis, the body will convert protein into carbs.
And all diabetics are running the risk of a little bit of a kidney issue, so we shouldn't over-protein ourselves anyways, right? So just kind of stay at a moderate level. 20% is, I think, pretty good. It seems to be good for me. So in doing that, you're able to kind of control the meal. So that kind of gets into number 2, which is talking about the diet program. And, you switch from a 60, whatever the heck it was, 5% fat, I think, and 35% protein. I don't know. It was a weird diet. So now what I am, I'm pretty much 60-20-20 as far as macros are concerned. And that's just, fats to proteins to carbohydrates.
Right.
But if you combine them right, then you can stretch that out, which means then you can raise up your basal insulin to the amount where you have a consistent amount exuding into the system. Example, I take 36, 37 units of Lantus a day instead of my previous 50 total.
And the less insulin you take, the better it is for you.
I dropped 35 pounds.
Yep.
They're directly proportional. You want to gain weight, take more insulin. That's it. That's simple. You want to lose weight, back off on the insulin. And it works the same in non-diabetics. Whatever's spiking your insulin, stop it.
Right.
Right? That's the best thing that I've seen in everybody. Because that was the thing. After I kind of figured out what was going on with me, people was like, what are you doing? Because I looked horrible.
So let me get this correct. Now, the way you have yourself stabilized, you don't use any short-acting insulin?
Only if I get a little silly, or if I don't, take my walk in time, or we'll get through all 4 things here. But I have a little bit of short acting on the side, but I rarely take more than 2 units additional a day.
Okay.
And the reason I only do that is because now I'm kind of in a range where I'll take a unit if I'm 135, even though that's normal range to everybody.
Now, what's your target range you're trying to keep your glucose in?
Me? Well, in Canada, numbers 4 to 6, 7, and yours would be about 70 to 110, 115.
70 to 110, even after a meal?
No, they'll probably drift to the low side of 140.
Okay.
Right. They'll drift to the side, about 140, but then they'll pop back down.
So you're saying 70 to 110 is like in between or away from meals?
Exactly. My last A1C was 5.7.
That's great.
So, I mean, it's just on that edge of being classified as a diabetic, but I used to be 13.2, and that's just not the place you want to be either.
Absolutely.
That's where all that bad stuff you were talking about.
Now, how do you monitor your sugar? Do you prick your finger, or do you use a continuous glucose monitor?
Great question. They've just been approved in Canada. We're a little behind everybody. So
is that right?
We've never had the option. So I still prick my finger. And that was the one thing I did. I was not very good English. A CGM would have been really nice 7 years ago when I turned myself into a guinea pig and a biohack, right? Because that's what I did. That's what I did to myself. But I was testing 10, 12 times a day to figure this out. Because you need to be able to establish a trend. I think the worst advice is a little off track, but all the type 2s that are out there listening to this, you need to test more than once a day. And morning's not always the only one.
Oh, absolutely. It's just, it's hard to get them to do it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But if you can get that correlation between, look, if you do this and you know where you're at, if you went on a trip, wouldn't you have a little plan of where you were headed?
Absolutely.
And if you don't check the map and correlate, am I there now? Okay, now we got to go here.
Right.
You got to plan this stuff out a little bit. So getting on we talked a little bit about the diet. This is number 2, if you want to move on to that. The third thing now is
I do want to get more into the diet.
The diet? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
But let's go ahead and continue. The third thing is what? Exercise?
Exercise, and it doesn't have to be crazy. It's just got to be consistent.
Right.
So
the same
walking.
amount and intensity and do it every single day?
Yeah, every single day. And you can change up the intensity a little bit. I mean, there's a little bit of a burst thing, and all I'm talking about is walking and then hit a hill. That's and 30 minutes seems to be a good number because you're not going too far with a diabetic. If you look at it this way, and I look at it from my petrochemical background, engineering background, your blood sugar level, between low and high is a tank. That's your tank amount. That's your reserves. And then, beyond that is your liver and your muscles and all that kind of stuff. But when you're on insulin, and especially if you're on short-acting insulin too much, that tank disappears like that.
Right.
If you're not managing it right. That's why I love doing a long-acting basal. Like, I just take one shot a day, Dr. Weeds. Just one.
That's great.
Right? And some of my clients, they like two. I have them on a split Lantus. That allows them to change it up a little bit. But they love the same thing too, right? So getting into the food now, I've developed a couple of recipes.
Hang on a second. On the exercise, let me just poke you a little more on that. What if they wanted to do an hour of exercise? Would that be more beneficial?
Absolutely. We could get into
and if they do
anything that's muscle resistant.
Right. And isn't it an advantage to working the different muscles in the body since they all utilize glucose?
Well, they do. And what you're also going to do is you're going to upregulate your GLUT4 receptors.
Right.
So the challenge with that is if you do it inconsistently, then you suffer from roller coastering because all of a sudden you upregulate your GLUT4s and you're taking too much insulin. So if you do it consistently, you can finally back off on your insulin to a point where it's going to start to match. But then once you quit doing that, then you have to upregulate your insulin because as you lose your receptors, you don't uptake the glucose as easy. So great question.
So you think it is an advantage to do a longer exercise session and potentially adding resistance training with, say, the walking, as long as you do approximately the same amount every single day?
So, for example, myself, I really target on every day walking 30 minutes. And then in addition to that, I play pickleball.
Okay.
So I do that about 3 times a week, and I typically play an hour and a half to 2 hours doing that. And I've rarely come out of that with having to deal with the blood sugar. That's the beauty of it. Before, this is something that maybe a lot of type 1s won't, they're scared to exercise. And I know why.
Because they're worried that their blood sugar will get too low.
Well, and if you look back to number 1 with the insulin regime, if you're stacking a bunch of that 3 meals a day, a whole bunch of short-acting insulin in there, not all of it absorbs. And then you start moving, and then you get these little pockets of insulin start exuding into your system. And you can prove this by saying another thing. I found this out by stepping into a hot tub. That's a great way to have a low blood sugar on that other insulin regime.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. All of a sudden, all them little pockets of insulin, all right, that maybe haven't absorbed yet throughout the day, they're everywhere. Like, it was like clockwork. 5 to 7 minutes, I'd have a low blood sugar in a hot tub. Now I take one twice a day because I'm on that nice stable insulin. And that just helps, soothe the muscles, and it's hydrotherapy, right? So it's wonderful that way.
Okay, cool. I want to go more into the diet in a few minutes, but maybe we could talk about number 4, which is stress.
Yeah, that's the wild card. So now that we've got to number 4, you can, any of the mathematicians out there, that's a, whatever you call that, quadratic formula. Right. So you got four variables, and just to kind of pick on my past regimes that were recommended to me. When you change all 4 variables all the time, how do you get a calculation? You got to stabilize one to actually run the numbers.
Correct.
Right. So that's where I stabilize the insulin in front. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to stabilize the food in the sense that we're going to mix it so that it slowly releases any of the carbohydrates available over a longer period of time, greater quantity of oils, which you need insulin for as well. All right. You need a little bit of insulin for all of that, but it stabilizes everything. The shake that I developed, I can get on 8 ounces of this 6 hours before I have to refuel. So I'll be at a, 4 or 5. So, 80, 90, eat that shake. I'll drift up to about a 130. All right. Back down 6 hours later, I'm down to about 90. I never used to be able to go 6 hours without having to have 2 snacks in between that. because you had the insulin doing this all the time, right? So that's just one example. And by the way, that shake is a great way to get people off wheat.
And what shake are we talking about?
Oh, I had sent you that. I actually just call it.
No, I know that. I'm just.
I just thank you. A little plug here. Sorry. I just call it a breakfast shake. We can come up with a name for it at some point in time. I'm not terribly creative that way. I just call it a breakfast shake.
Right.
But it contains some really good ingredients like hemp hearts, avocado, 3 different nuts. I use usually pecans, walnuts, Brazil nuts.
And basically, these are all good sources of healthy fats.
Absolutely. Great fiber too, right? So believe it or not, when you look at the numbers on this thing, I think it rings out at like 550 or 60 calories if you're looking at it from a caloric point of view.
Correct. Yeah.
But it's like a time release. And that time release works in perfect conjunction with a nice flat line of insulin. So everything in your background metabolic is getting taken care of. Your incoming digestion is getting taken care of, and things are getting tucked away nicely where they're supposed to be. And there's no roller coastering going on.
And that's because glucose enters the system, causes a blood sugar spike. Then you have to have the insulin to bring it down. And fat takes a long time to break down and digest and get turned into energy. So you get a much slower increase of energy over time. Exactly.
And you don't have that, for years, Dr. Bates, the only time I ever saw like a 90 or 100 was either on my way to 5 or on my way to 50. It was like going like this, I got a client right now in North Carolina, and she's just so grateful right now, but she's I just sent her week number 5, right? But it blew her away. And she was just diagnosed 2 years ago. She's been through 3 different endocrinologists. She's on a CGM. She was taking Lantus and short-acting insulin. But she described it this way. She said, you'd look at my CGM and it looked like a heartbeat, the way the blood sugars were going up and down. She said, and then I met you, and it just kind of flatlined. And I went, well, if I was a cardiologist, I wouldn't use that. I wouldn't use that example. But as for blood sugars, that's fantastic.
Right.
And literally, she would show me her graphs. And I mean, she was drawing like 80 right through the night, steady. And she'd never been like that before. Right.
So, when it comes to diet, is ketogenic the best diet? Paleo? How low should we go on carbohydrates?
Well, if you're looking at 20%, and if you go by the 2,000, I don't eat that many calories a day, to be honest with you. I don't think I eat more than about 1,500, right? Because I really don't need it, and I don't think any of us really need it, depending on what kind of work we're doing.
It depends your metabolic rate.
Yeah, and it depends on what kind of work we're doing, right? So for me, I don't need that much. But I would guess carb-wise, if you were looking at a number, it's going to be higher than keto. Keto gets a little tricky with us because we really have to be a lot more into that, upregulate those GLUT4 receptors, be out lifting weights, be out grunting, and for quite a period of time. If you're willing to do that, it's a great way. And then you can probably go for, if I did that, I could probably drop to 18 units. Wow. If I did a lot of that. But I'm 57 now. I'm not really in the mood to do that much anymore. I love playing pickleball because it's social and it's fun. And
yeah,
I like exercising when there's a laugh to be had, right? I don't like exercising just for the sake of having a hard workout. It's just not my style.
Yeah.
But
I get it.
I'll do it for my health, absolutely. But
yeah,
you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm a gym guy. I love going to the gym. I've trained with weights for decades and decades, and so I need 3,000 calories or I lose weight. So.
Well, yeah, and that's a great example. I don't have to do that much anymore, and also I don't know how much different our age is. You look quite a bit younger than I am. So
I just turned 61. So
oh well, see, there's a plug for you, right? I don't have any hair anymore.
I appreciate that.
That went by. But oh, that's fantastic. And I think that's probably the thing that really has to ring out the loudest is I don't really know if I look 57 either, especially when you know that I've been diabetic for 35 years.
Right. Yeah, diabetes.
That's how they do aging is with diabetics. they do rapid aging with diabetics. That's how they do it.
Absolutely.
So anyways, talking about number 4.
So give me an idea of your, what do you have in the morning for breakfast?
Okay, so I have a shake. That's typically what I have. Usually 6 days a week, I'll have a shake in the morning.
And what are the carbs in the shake? Is fruit in there or not?
Yeah, I've got berries in there typically. I get most of my carbs from berries, so usually
That's
blueberry.
one of the lower glycemic, higher phytonutrient fruits.
High antioxidant,
Yep.
you know, ORAC, whatever they call that level,
Yep.
right through the roof. So, and up here I get wild Canadian ones. Well, they're little tiny blueberries. They're just really tiny, you know, but they just explode with flavor, right? I put about a 2-inch piece of banana in there, half an avocado, and then those nuts, coconut milk.
Okay.
And I will put a little bit, you know, when I use those little, what do you call a bullet kind of thing, or a NutriBullet?
Yeah. Yep.
So it's about 16 ounces, right? And that's 2 servings. So when I build this thing, I'll try to get the avocado so that the pit hole is up. And then I just fill that with a little bit of maple syrup.
Oh, okay.
Hey?
There you go.
That's kind of how I do all my, you know, I came from, pardon me, I'm going to digress for a second. All my previous teaching was you had to weigh all your food. You had to do all this stuff.
Right.
And, you know, by the time you got to your meal, it was cold and horrible, right? So, you know, for everybody out there, never eat a piece of protein bigger than the size of the palm of your hand without your fingers, thumb, and cut off at the wrist. Same size. That works well. That works well for almost everybody. Never eat more than that for a meal. And I was taught this. You take that. That's the size of your stomach right there. You only have so much acid resting, waiting in the stomach. So I found the less protein I ate, the more benefit I got from it.
Yeah.
So
that's your breakfast, and then.
Then that'll take me 5 or 6 hours.
Okay.
I've got a cracker recipe that I use. It's just 4 seeds. It's real easy. It's just pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, chia seeds, and what's the other one? Pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds.
Okay.
Chia seeds. So there's the 4, right? Is that the
right.
4? The chia is going to stick it together. So it's just like a half a cup of each, and 1 cup of water is the ratio. It's a real simple ratio. Spice the thing. Cook it for about an hour and a half at about 300.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen some of those at the health market.
Oh, they're great. So, you know, they're real low carb. Like if you have a cookie sheet of those, you know, and you cut it into 24 pieces, they're less than 4 grams of carbs. So I'll have a couple of those, maybe with some almond butter. And believe it or not, that carries me for enough hours to get to supper time.
Okay.
And then that's typically when I take my shot. So then that's when I have, from that time before I go to bed, that's when I have the little bit bigger curve in the lattice. But that's a little bit bigger meal too, right?
What's dinner look like for you?
Usually a piece of protein, well-sourced, fish a couple days a week. I still do pork, but I get raised pork right, you know, a couple of miles from the house. So I even see how they're being raised, right? So that's why I moved here. And we got the same thing with beef, but beef doesn't agree with me anymore. So I don't do beef, right?
Okay.
You know, some people are like that, right? I don't know. Maybe I got that bug where beef doesn't taste good. Wasn't it you get bitten by a bug or?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think I did hear about that. Yeah.
Beef doesn't taste good anymore or something.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's something like that. I'm not sure if that's it, but it just doesn't digest well is what I'm getting at. And it is hard to digest, right? We've always known that.
Right.
But there's, you know, at least half a plate of greens. I'm big on fermenting. I make a lot of sauerkraut or pickled cauliflower, broccoli.
Kimchi.
Yeah, exactly. Change it up. Put a little ginger in there. Put a little garlic in there.
Cool.
Variety, lots of color is what I try to go for.
That fermentation is good for the gut bacteria.
And you know what it'll do? That I believe, and we should do some research on this, or somebody should, that the lactobacillus in that will actually lower your blood sugar. Because what does it do? It likes to eat sugar. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you study the process of how, you know, fermenting works, you know, the salt water brings out the moisture. It's got a little glucose with it, right? And they proliferate, away they go.
There you go.
But balancing the gut, and I think that's where a lot of confusion comes for a lot of people, is why can't they balance their blood sugars? When this isn't right, you never will.
Right.
You never will. It's going to be too many variables. There's going to be too many surprises.
Now, are there any carbohydrates with that dinner, or just
not usually? Because then what I do is then I go to the evening.
Right. And now one of the issues for diabetics is, if your blood sugar gets too low in the middle of the night, you might have trouble sleeping, and
it disrupts everything, whether you're high or whether you're low. If you're high, you're going to be laying awake, tossing, turning, sweating, leg cramps, that kind of stuff. If you're low, well, you're low. You got to do something about it. So now you're awake, right?
Right.
You're awake and in the fridge and doing something about it, right? And depending on how low it goes, because every time you go low, if you're just in a shallow low, you won't trip number 4. You won't trip an adrenaline event, right? You won't work your way down to the hypothalamus and be in lizard mode, right? But if you get low enough in the blood sugar, there you go. You're just drenched in sweat. You're in full blown shock. Because that's what it is. It's shock. Shock is shock. Doesn't matter whether insulin causes it or you cut your arm off. It's the same shock.
So how do you make sure that your blood sugar stays, as even as possible through the night?
Well, that was one of the miracles I came up with. I developed a bar recipe, and I have that on my website. It's a free download. It's a free report. That thing is wonderful. It's once or twice you got to build it, and then you'll get comfortable building it. But it's marvelous. People eat the thing and they go, "Diabetics supposed to eat that?" Well, it does. It's got like a cup of honey in there. Actually, by the time you get the topping and everything else done, there's about 2 cups of honey and maple syrup combined in the whole thing, right? But it's a huge bar. It's a huge recipe. It's about 3 inches by a half an inch. I eat 2 of those at night. Flatline my sugars right through the night. So there's a lot of nuts and seeds in that. There's hemp hearts again. There's coconut shredded. There's coconut oil, holds it together. I use cacao, cocoa butter, and either honey or maple syrup for the chocolate topping. Did I get everybody with the chocolate topping? That usually stops everybody there. I had them with the chocolate topping, right? But it's wonderful. It's decadent, but it's not, because you make it with your own hands. It's the minimalist of ingredients and the maximalist, if I could use that word, of nutrition. And people that aren't even diabetics, when I feed them that bar, the next day they talk to me, they go, I had the best sleep last night. Because think about it. What's the body doing when it sleeps?
If you didn't have that bar, what would happen to your blood sugar during the night?
Well, let's
say you just had dinner and then you went to sleep 3 hours later.
I would eventually have a low. So that's the deal. You're kind of you're pre-filling the tank in a slow burn.
Right. Now, what if you were just to consume some fat at that point? Do you think that would be as good or not necessarily? You have to have some of the carb in there.
Yeah, it's good to kind of have a little bit of everything, I think. But definitely, you're looking at that 60% mark of fat and probably that 20% of carbohydrate. Because if you between that and the protein or fiber, let's not forget that. Right. And that being kind of part of the carb. But if you stretch that with that load of oil in there, you really flatten that thing out. There's no spiking going on. And that's how this all comes together. If you can get a flat line of insulin and a fat line or a slow increase, almost like a swell of an ocean, right?
Right.
Then that's great. And then you were talking here earlier too. The fourth thing is these adrenaline events, right? What happens when they come along?
Yeah. So when when you're under stress and then your body secretes cortisol, right? Which
your gut shuts down. All bets are off, man.
Right.
All bets are off at that point. So that's like having, I found that out when I was diagnosed with the gastroparesis, because I wasn't really having those kind of things, but I'd take a shot, I'd eat, 40 minutes, 50 minutes later, I'm having a low. And that was back when I was eating like a lot of carbs, right? And I'm like, what's going on here? Well, nothing was moving. That's an interesting thing to deal with, because now you're full. Now you got to eat more.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? Because you're still full. You can't really eat anything more, but now you got to eat more. And then by the time you do that, to get your sugar to come up, well, then the other stuff finally moves through and digests.
And so the gastroparesis has to do with stress, you said, or?
Well, it can be partially stress, but mostly that's from long-term mismanagement of blood sugar levels. Okay. So the gastroparesis is a condition where the muscles, the peristaltic muscles.
The motility of the gut.
They get weak.
Yeah, right? I treat a lot of patients for SIBO,
right.
IBS SIBO, and motility problems are a major contributor to that.
Yeah, and I think wheat's a big contributor to that. Like white bread, it just doesn't want to move through, right? It just won't move. It's like squeezing toothpaste.
Well, it's actually an autoimmune condition where you get cross-reactivity, and it ends up attacking the nerves and the structural proteins that control that motility.
I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, Dr. Pimentel came up with a test for that autoimmune factor. It's an anti-vinculin, anti-cytolethal distending toxin serum test.
Boy, that's a mouthful. Okay, have a couple of toddies and try saying that. Sound like you're from Scotland.
So you had this decreased gut motility,
right?
And so then, even though you consumed a meal, your carbohydrates weren't getting into your system, and you had low blood sugar. Wow. So that was really hard.
Oh, it's a management nightmare. And then when you deal with, I had been in business most of my life, and I was, had my own business in the oil industry before I had this premonition, and basically let's move on and change fields here 5-6 years ago. So in that industry, there's just that background, always on stress, always on call. When you went, like I was telling you, when I figured this out, I was gone for 8 days straight, 24 hours a day. I would sleep in the unit that was my truck. Oh, by the way, this unit that I built here's the irony. I developed a process for cleaning natural gas dehyes, that thing that blew up.
Yeah.
I developed a process to fix the reason why it blew up.
Ah, interesting.
And it was a cleaning system that I developed that I would go around and, basically sit on the units for days, cleaning up and filtering their glycol.
Huh.
And getting everything clean and removing oils and balancing pHs and all those kind of things. So chemistry was kind of my deal, which is kind of an easy carryover into this. If you don't understand the chemistry, it's a little mind-boggling. Yeah.
Boy, that must have been some exposure to a host of chemicals.
Oh, well, and that could be the whole other factor too. Back in the 80s, I probably bathed in methanol more than once, right?
Oh, wow.
It's 40 below out there. Things aren't working. You take the gloves off to work. You can't work in anything else. We didn't have rubber gloves in those days. You had the leather gloves, and if it got too fine and it was, too small to work, you just took them off and you worked with it, right? We worked with xylene and toluene and, all these things that would melt waxes and, things that you shouldn't be melting in your body probably too, right? We'll just leave it at that, right?
Exactly.
It was a dangerous industry, right? For definitely toxins. So now the thing about getting onto the stress, you can have that long-term stress is what I was saying, running my own business. You have that long-term constant stress, that background continual burn. You're going to have a really hard time managing your sugars because you're going to end up lifting your basal rate up to a point to tolerate that. And then if you get a good day, you'll be riding low, right? So developing strategies, I do that with my clients, help them develop strategies on how to work with those. I find for the immediate thing, GABA is wonderful.
Okay, cool.
Even as a prophylactic, you can take, I got one client would take one because associated with, I think all diabetics, especially type 1, is huge anxiety because we're almost in the sympathetic mode all the time.
Right?
Because if you think about it from a metabolic point of view, if you're above range, you're freaked out.
Yeah.
The body is freaking out. A lot of people, here's a little tip for everybody out there, a real quick one. If you're hungry, check your sugar. You're probably high. Period.
Right.
And if you're high, why are you eating?
Right.
Just take a little bit of insulin and wait it out and prove me wrong that you're not going to get satiated. And I'll guarantee you drop below 8, you'll be like, oh, I don't like that guy anymore. But that's the way it works. If you live between that, 70, 140, you're never, ever hungry.
So what are some of the other things you can do to manage stress besides GABA?
Well, that walking works really well.
Okay.
Getting out in nature. Don't take yourself so serious sometimes.
Yeah. They call that forest bathing.
Well, the thing is, we've got a lot of stuff to do in a day just to actually exist, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is the hardest disease that ever preyed upon people that are disorganized, because it's hard on them. If you had the poor people that get it when they're 5, 6, 7 years old and never really have. I didn't get it till I was in my 20s, so I already knew a little bit of lifestyle, what I kind of wanted to do, and it was kind of nice to pick up and go and do this whenever you felt like it, right? But you don't get to do that anymore. You got to plan stuff. You got to work on things. So there is a lot of extra time, and that weighs on people a lot. I think that builds a lot of anxiety. That builds a lot of resentment. I think every type 1 diabetic, regardless of how it's brought on, is in a mild form of PTSD. So depression runs rampant in our field, and I think there again, some amino acid therapy is somewhat helpful in that, because I believe we're in this roller coaster, and all we're doing all the time is we're taking insulin or taking sugar to counteract the insulin that we took, and where's the nutrition?
Yes.
We're not getting any of the proper amino acids when we're chasing high blood sugar to low blood sugar to high blood sugar. And, obviously dipping into the donuts isn't really going to give you amino acids. But you really want one when you're down in a low blood sugar. It looks pretty good at that time, right?
Yeah, and amino acids can be precursors for serotonin and dopamine, and
you betcha, yeah.
Really super.
And that getting into the sleep,
depression and anxiety and everything. Yeah.
Right. And then we get into that sleep. So that all night sleep report that I have kind of covers a little bit of all of that, right? And it's really mostly about trying to get into good blood sugar balance, because if you're running to bed and you're high, you're just going to toss and turn all night.
Right.
If you don't have the right balance going in and you get a low, you're going to wake up. So you got to get those blood sugars balanced. And if you fix this, it's, what it's like. You've seen it. It always amazes me.
Yeah. So, this has been a great podcast, Lyle. I appreciate you providing us a lot of interesting strategies and ways to think about how to manage type 1 diabetes. How can our listeners get a hold of you and find out about some of the things that you offer?
Oh, great. Thank you. Type1simplified.com. That's my website. Okay. Download the free report. Great information for the sleep, and if anything, the chocolate energy bars.
And where can when are you going to market those? When are you going to put those on the market?
Everybody asks me that. And
everybody wants, you got to put those on the market.
The problem is when you try to put them on the market, you got to change the formula sometimes to satisfy the industry, right? For market conditions, right?
Maybe not. I mean, there's bars that are in the refrigerated section of some of the market.
I see that. I see that now. I see that now. I don't know, you might have something there. Try them, please. Try them. Try them out. Let me know what you think of them.
Yeah.
Pass them on to your clients. Right.
How do we get the recipe for the bars?
It's in that free report.
Okay.
And my shake is on the website. There's a little article that I just wrote, and I just recently got the website up, so I don't have a lot of articles in there, but it's about ibuprofen and either having the shake in the morning. It's a little story about pickleball.
Oh, okay.
I had some friends that, she was taking a lot of ibuprofen, and her and her husband, they were visiting town. They were kind of pros in pickleball, right? So they were coming for training and teaching and stuff, the instructors. So I fed him a shake in the morning, and then we're down playing about an hour later, and I hear him giggling and laughing, and he's like, "Why are you shooting out?" She goes, "I don't know. I'm loose." So all of a sudden they were over hitting shots because they didn't have that inflammation anymore.
I think you put some turmeric or something in there, right?
There's turmeric, there's cinnamon to help your insulin work a little better, increase the efficacy of it. Yeah, there's a little bit of everything there. I put iodine in there. It's kind of my carry-all for, and then the wintertime, this is a quick one if we can get this out. Vitamin D, folks, for diabetics.
Yeah.
Gotta have vitamin D.
Are there a set of supplements that you like to use for type 1 diabetics?
Vitamin D, magnesium, GABA, 5-HTP.
Okay.
So the 5-HTP is the precursor to serotonin. Take that in the morning, and then when the blue light shuts off, we get our melatonin from that, right? That'll help your sleep. And if you're really stressed out, take a GABA.
What do you think about some of the blood sugar stabilizers that we typically use for type 2 diabetics? The supplements that have things like chromium, you mentioned cinnamon, vanadium, lipoic acid.
Copper and zinc is very important. Everything in proportion, right? Everything in the ratios that it's supposed to be. I think that would be great. Again, we get back to this. I think most of us, being in the condition that we've gotten to at that point, are nutritionally deprived. So if we can get most of it from the diet, great. But up front, when they're not feeling good, I think they need that little help, right? What do you think? I think they need that extra supplementation.
Absolutely. I think you can be helpful. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Good. So, awesome. Thank you, Lyle.
Thank you, Doctor.